Welcome back to Science Unveiled, the podcast where we explore the cutting edge of scientific research. I'm Emma.
And I'm Alex. Today we're taking a deep dive into a fascinating study titled Pattern Selection by Material Aging, Modeling Chemical Gardens in 2 and 3 Dimensions, authored by Bruno Battista, Amari Morris, and Oliver Steinbach.
This paper tackles the complex phenomenon of chemical gardens, those intriguing plant-like structures that form during certain chemical reactions. Despite being known for centuries, the mechanisms behind their formation have remained elusive.
Exactly. The authors use a cellular automaton model to simulate the formation of these structures, focusing on how material aging influences pattern selection. They incorporate detailed rules and parameters to capture the essence of chemical garden formation.
Let's start by setting the stage. Chemical gardens are formed by precipitation reactions, often involving metal salts and silicate solutions. When a metal salt comes into contact with a silicate solution, it forms a thin, semi-permeable membrane of precipitate. This membrane can grow into complex, tubular structures resembling plants.
The key challenge has been modeling these structures to understand the underlying mechanisms. Traditional models haven't fully captured the variety of patterns observed experimentally. That's where this study makes significant contributions.
The authors develop a cellular automaton model, which is a grid-based computational approach where each cell can exist in a finite number of states. The state of each cell evolves over discrete time steps according to specific rules based on the states of neighboring cells.
In their model, each cell can be one of 3 species: reactant A, reactant B, or the precipitate C. The grid starts mostly filled with reactant A, and reactant B is injected during the simulation. The precipitate C forms where A and B meet.
Let's delve into the specific rules they define for the model. 1. Rule 1. Precipitate formation. If a cell has both reactants, A and B, in its neighborhood, it becomes precipitate C. This models the chemical reaction where A and B combine to form C. 2. Rule 2a. Reactant injection and membrane expansion. During each time step, a precipitate cell C with a certain number of neighboring B cells is randomly selected and converted into B. Simultaneously, a nearby A cell is converted into a new C cell. This simulates the injection of reactant B and the outward growth of the precipitate membrane. Rule 2b. Aging of precipitate. Each C cell has an age counter that increments with each time step. New C cells start with an age of 1. This aging is crucial because it affects the likelihood of the precipitate being replaced in Rule 2a.
The authors explore how the aging of the precipitate affects pattern formation. They introduce an age-dependent probability function that follows an exponential decay. This means that younger precipitate is more likely to be replaced, simulating the idea that fresh precipitate is more malleable and susceptible to deformation.
By adjusting the aging rate constant, which determines how quickly the precipitate ages, they observe different patterns. Low aging rate, slow aging results in circular precipitation fronts, similar to what is observed when precipitate particles are loosely aggregated and can be moved easily. Intermediate aging rate. They see irregular, wrinkled patterns with increased amounts of interior precipitate. High aging rate. Rapid aging leads to filamentous structures, thin, tube-like formations that grow predominantly at their tips, much like the filament patterns seen in actual chemical garden experiments.
They also introduce a parameter called spatial slack, which allows the precipitate C to be placed within a certain distance from its original position. This accounts for convection or movement in the system, leading to thicker and fuzzier precipitate walls.
Another critical addition is the buoyancy effect, which they model by modifying the aging function to include a term dependent on the orientation of the precipitate membrane relative to gravity. This allows them to simulate the upward growth seen in real chemical gardens due to differences in fluid densities. Essentially, they adjust the likelihood of growth at different parts of the structure based on how it aligns with gravity. This means that horizontal segments are more affected by buoyancy than vertical ones, encouraging upward growth.
By incorporating buoyancy, they can replicate various vertical structures, including upward-growing filaments and branching patterns, which are commonly observed in vertical Hellishaw cell experiments. Speaking of experiments, the authors compare their simulation results with experimental observations extensively. For example, they match the different pattern types, filaments, irregular structures, and circular fronts, with those seen in experiments by adjusting the aging rate and spatial slack parameters.
They also quantify their results. They analyze the total number of precipitate cells as a function of the aging rate. They find that there's a maximum in precipitate formation at intermediate aging rates, corresponding to the transition between circular fronts and filamentous patterns.
Another fascinating aspect is their exploration of three-dimensional patterns. By extending their model to 3 dimensions and including buoyancy, they simulate complex tubular structures resembling actual chemical gardens, complete with nodules and branching.
They even simulate the formation of nodules along the tubes by adjusting the increment of the aging counter. Smaller increments cause the tubes to widen into nodular segments, similar to what is seen when there's a sudden increase in the injection rate of reactant B in experiments. This comprehensive modeling effort not only reproduces the variety of patterns observed, but also provides insights into the mechanisms driving these formations. It highlights the significance of material aging and mechanical properties in pattern selection.
The authors suggest that the fresh precipitate membrane behaves like a self-healing material. Micro breaches in the membrane allow for expansion, and the material quickly reforms, enabling the structure to grow in size and volume. This is different from traditional elasticity or plasticity. Understanding these mechanisms could have broader implications. For example, it might inspire the development of new self-growing or self-healing materials in engineering and technology.
Absolutely. Moreover, the study underscores the value of using computational models to understand complex natural phenomena. Despite the simplicity of the rules, the model captures the essential physics of the system.
Of course, there are limitations. The model doesn't account for all aspects of chemical gardens, such as friction in confined spaces or the pressure dynamics in elongating filaments. But it's a significant step forward. In their discussion, the authors also mention potential areas for future research. They propose that their cellular automaton approach could be extended to continuous time models using nonlinear reaction diffusion equations, although that poses its own challenges.
To wrap up, this study offers a detailed exploration of how material aging affects pattern formation in chemical gardens. It bridges the gap between experimental observations and theoretical modeling, providing a platform for future research in this area. It's a great example of how computational models can enhance our understanding of complex systems in physical chemistry and materials science.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. If you're interested in exploring the mathematical details further, we encourage you to read the full paper. We'll include a link in the show notes.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
Until next time, I'm Alex.
And I'm Emma.
Stay curious.